Okay, so we are recording. Okay, Anne, you're free to start whenever you would like, and I'll keep an eye in the chat as well in case people ask questions or if I have to put anybody on, but I'll be at the ready in case people are joining our call as well.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Anne Roemer, and I am honored to be with you all. I work at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and I manage NASA's astronaut selection program. So I'm sorry I'm a little hoarse today. I have twin fifth graders, and we made it through this whole year without getting sick because everyone was wearing masks. And of course, now there's a cold going around at the end of the school year. So I apologize for being a little scratchy. Thankfully, it's not COVID, so a cold is bearable. So I want to just go over a little bit of the history about astronaut selection. I have some charts that I'll share with you, and then I am happy to answer whatever questions you may have about astronaut selection. So let me share my screen. And pull those up. Can you guys, Samantha, can you confirm, can you see the charts?
I can see your PowerPoint at the moment.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. You're good?
Yes, is that what that is?
Yes, good to go.
Okay, then I will get started. Okay, so obviously NASA's astronaut program goes back in history to the first group of 7 astronauts who were selected back in 1959. Some of you may remember that, the Mercury 7. That was the first group of astronauts that NASA ever picked or selected to be astronauts. All of those folks, men in particular, came from the military. And really up through the first 7 groups of astronauts that NASA ever picked, all were from the military service. There were no civilian astronauts in those original groups. Given that folks were coming out of the military service groups, right, the requirements were fairly specific. They had maximum ages, they had a maximum height based on who could fit into some of the capsules that they were flying in both the Mercury Gemini days and then also Apollo. They had minimum degree requirements. And then for those original groups, the first few original groups, they had to be jet pilots and also test pilot school grads. After the first 2 groups, the test pilot school was made optional. And then groups 4 and 6, they made being jet pilots optional. And that's where you'll actually see that we ended up with some geologists and other things as we were getting closer to landing on the moon.
39. Oh, no, later, no more than 39.
Okay, sorry, I was hearing, I didn't know if that was a question. So then if we look at kind of astronaut selection as a whole and where we are in 2021, in total, there have been 350 total astronauts that have been selected over time. NASA's Johnson Space Center assumed responsibility for running astronaut selection with the inception of the Space Shuttle program. And so we actually selected the first group of both civilian and military astronauts for the astronaut corps, starting with the class of 1978 as we were getting ready for the first flight of the Space Shuttle to happen. Over the history, you can kind of see there have been, even though we started accepting civilians into the astronaut corps in 1978, there's still a slight edge in the number of military astronauts that have been selected. Last year, or the last selection cycle that we completed in 2017, we selected 12 individuals. 6 were military and 6 were civilian. And that's probably the first equally split class that we had between civilians and military members. Also, over the course of the astronaut program, we have had 195 pilots, or 195 non-pilots, 155 pilots that have been selected. And again, even as we are now in today's space program, going back to more of a capsule, flying capsules, there is still a need to maintain astronaut pilots. We do use the T-38 high performance aircraft to train our crews. And so it's always going to be invaluable for us to have astronauts who can fly in the front seat of those aircraft. In terms of the male-female split, you can see women still have some work to do to catch up to the number of male astronauts that have been selected. But again, that continually seems to get better with every cycle in terms of the number of women we see apply. And our 2013 class of astronauts, we selected 8 astronauts, and there were 4 men and 4 women picked, and that was the first equal class that we'd had where it was a 50-50 split. So since JSC has assumed responsibility for astronaut selection, we've received roughly about 65,000 applications to be an astronaut. So certainly that has grown with the past 2 selection cycles. With the class of 2017, we actually had a new record that was set. We received over 18,354 applications, which was beyond our wildest dreams. And we are currently in a selection cycle right now that we received over 12,000 applications, and we are getting ready to actually start interviews for this next class on Monday. So we'll see what comes out of that. In terms of the type of degree, I think a lot of folks think that you have to have a PhD to be picked as an astronaut, and you can see that only about 22% of our folks have completed their PhD. The most popular degree is their master's degree. And of course, in terms of the bachelor's, a lot of those fall into the pilot category, but most of our pilots, even today that we select, have completed test pilot school, which really is the equivalent of a master's degree, given the coursework that goes into that. So from students, we always get questions about what's the chance of applying and getting selected to be an astronaut. So if we look at our total number of applications and the 350 people that have been picked over the years, there's roughly a 0.42% chance of applying and getting selected. But of course, there's no chance of getting picked if they don't apply. So we always encourage students and those who want to be astronauts to follow their dreams. Okay, what requirements are needed to be an astronaut? It's actually fairly straightforward. NASA is a government organization, and as such, right, we require US citizenship. They do have to, excuse me, have the ability to pass a NASA flight physical, and so that is critical. With this selection cycle, I'm so sorry, I am so hoarse today. They do have to have a master's degree and then also 2 years of work experience in their field. And for pilots, again, they still have to have the 1,000 hours. What do we do from a selection standpoint? So we do accept applications online. This time the applicants had to complete some screening questions and also an assessment battery. We do also review their initial qualifications. This is probably one of the few announcements out there where we have a lot of people who apply. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. Who don't meet the basic qualifications. We actually get a lot of calls from people who want the rejection letter stating that they have applied to be a US astronaut. Ultimately, when we kind of screen the people out who aren't qualified, we do an initial rating of their application through various boards and panels that are comprised mostly of senior flown astronauts. And then ultimately, we move on to interviews and medical assessments. And then from that, we're able to do a final ranking and selection. Because we get so many applicants, we do try and categorize people into discipline fields. Pilots, flight test engineers, biological and medical scientists, engineers, and then physical scientists are how we kind of group people. So how do we know if applicants have the right stuff? Of course, they go through an interview process with a board.
Excuse me, Anne, did
Yeah.
you stop sharing a PowerPoint with us?
Oh, did it disappear?
Yes, it did.
Oh, I'm glad you told me, sorry. Let me go back. I'm gonna mute actually, and hold on, let me fix this.
Okay, we can see the PowerPoint now in front of you.
Okay, it's back.
Now it's back to your Zoom call.
Oh boy. There, now you can see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't realize it had gone off. So we obviously do interviews with the candidates. We invite roughly 120 people for the first interview and 50 for the second interview. And then we also do a series of psychological, behavioral, and medical testing. In addition to team reaction exercises, individual performance exercises, tools, and EVA skills. So some of the pictures you can see are some of the activities that we do with them when we bring them to the Johnson Space Center for interviews. So ultimately, if we look at the last class of astronauts, we selected 12. As I mentioned earlier, 6 were military, 6 were civilian, and there were 5 women and 7 men. Interesting facts about the class, we had several of the military applicants with Bronze Stars. One of the women was in the women's national rugby team. One of our women came from the first class of women's submariners who helped make the US Naval Submarine Force when they first allowed women onto submarines. We selected an academic professor at MIT, and one of our doctors was actually both a medical doctor and a helicopter pilot. So what happens after they're picked? They actually report to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. They undergo a 2-year training program that includes training in learning Russian, ISS systems training, extravehicular activity, how to do a spacewalk, and then the T-38 flying, as well as robotics. Ultimately, after that 2-year training window, they will be ready to be assigned to a spaceflight mission. And once assigned to a spaceflight mission, they normally undergo another 18 months of mission-specific training. And then, of course, would they wait for the next class announcements? So just in closing, kind of some of the things that are going on at NASA. We just this November celebrated 20 years of continuous human presence in space on the International Space Station. So there have been humans up there since the fall of 2000, which is pretty amazing. We have a current goal of sending the first woman to the moon by the year 2024. We have started in engaging in commercial companies and partnerships with SpaceX and Boeing that are currently taking humans to low Earth orbit or to the International Space Station. And so really, rather than NASA building our own vehicles, we are trying to partner with commercial companies to do that. And then internally, we are focusing on building the Orion spacecraft. The goal there is to take humans beyond low Earth orbit. So that'll be the vehicle that will take us back to the moon. And of course, from NASA's perspective, hopefully take humans to Mars. And so that is it from a chart perspective, but I'm happy to talk with you and answer any questions that you might have about NASA and or the astronaut program. And again, I sincerely apologize for the coughing. I just, I ended up catching a cold this week, so.
It's okay, and it happens to me all the time too during.
Oh, I know, it's the worst though when you get a coughing fit and you're the one trying to talk, so I'm so sorry. And when I have my slides showing, I can't always mute, so anyhow, I apologize for coughing at you, but I'm certainly glad to be here with you and happy to talk and answer any questions.
Great. Well, I think we had one question from Tara. She asked, what is the length of a selection cycle?
That is a great question. And now there's probably two answers to that. Under normal circumstances, I would tell you it takes us about 12 to 18 months from the point that we open an announcement to the point that we announce astronauts. Of course, none of our contingency plans accounted for a global pandemic. And so this current cycle that we are on, we are about a year behind schedule just because we couldn't progress into the interview phase, given travel restrictions, et cetera. So this current selection cycle that we're working, assuming we get to the end of it fairly quickly, will take us about 2 years instead of 12 months-ish.
Okay, great. And then I see Tammy made a note that astronaut Bonnie Dunbar is from her hometown.
Very nice. I used to work with Bonnie Dunbar. She is an amazing lady.
And then Tara asked another question here. It says, are there any candidates that are not approved for the astronaut program that are hired in any other areas of the NASA program?
Being an astronaut is a long shot, right? Given as many applications as we receive. We do end up seeing them apply for other vacancies. We also see a lot of people who already work at NASA apply to be astronauts, and so they obviously continue their careers with NASA whether or not selected. So we do try to leverage especially some of the finalists to see if they want to come back and work and try, to engage in a healthy relationship, even though everyone may not get selected in the end.
Tara with another question. She's at the ready. She says, what is an example of a team reaction activity? Maybe we need to add this to our recruitment strategy. So Tara's actually in the human resources department for our company as well.
Oh,
so she's very intrigued.
Hey, Tara, well, yes, right. That's what I do is work in HR. Team reaction exercises are great. So for being an astronaut, the activities we do might be a little intense for a normal recruiting strategy. But in general, right, we actually divide the applicants into teams when they're visiting with us, and we give them tasks. You actually, some of the pictures on there were of those activities, right? And one person is assigned as the leader. There may be comm troubles. We try and put them under time limits, sometimes throw in, right, a task where maybe they don't always have the right parts that they need to complete the job, et cetera. And the goal is to see how they work with others on a team to accomplish something and adjust and to get the job done, even though maybe everything that they need isn't there and available to them. So it's interesting to watch behavior when you add a few stressful circumstances to some team activities and see really how do they respond and how do they lead. And when they're not assigned as the leader, how do they follow because being an astronaut often requires as much followership as it does leadership, right? Following commands from mission control, et cetera. So yeah, that's a little bit about what a team reaction exercise involves.
Okay, thank you. And then I see Amy asked, how many members are on the selection board?
So typically the board involves about, I'd say 10 to 12 members. Most of those are are astronauts who have already flown and completed a flight assignment. I sit on the board from an HR perspective, and then normally, occasionally we'll have a flight director or some other representative on the board, but generally speaking, between 10 and 12 folks. So it's a pretty intimidating interview board.
Okay, I see. And then I see somebody from Absorca Senior Living asked, is there a weight limit for astronauts?
I don't know that there's a limit per se. It probably has more to do with height and with health, if that makes sense. But right, I mean, if you're 6'6", you're gonna weigh more than somebody who's 5'2". So I don't necessarily know that there's a weight limit.
Okay, thank you. I see John Bueno asked, what about those who do not make it through training, and who decides who gets to move on?
That is a good question, and something we actually didn't have a ton of experience with until the 2017 class. We actually selected 12, and we had someone who left kind of midway through the training cycle. The goal from a NASA perspective, though, is that the training program is not really meant to continue to weed people out. At that point, we're doing what we can to make sure they all make it through training. And if that means, right, somebody's struggling in robotics, it's not that we say, okay, you're too bad, you're not going to be an astronaut. We really try and then add supplemental training to make sure that we can bring them up to the level that they need to perform at. So really the goal through the 2-year initial training period is not to lose anyone through the training.
Okay. Somebody from Absorca also asked, does taking Dramamine make you not qualify being an astronaut?
Oh, I don't know. I could, if this were me and you were putting me in a rocket that was going to experience all of those G forces and travel at 17,000 miles per hour around the Earth, I think I'd want some Dramamine. I know that, right, they equip the astronauts probably with a couple of things to kind of help them as they make the transition from gravity to no gravity. So, but I don't know specifically if it's Dramamine. I'd want some Dramamine personally.
Yeah, I can imagine with all the turbulence. Great, thank you very much for asking that. If anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to put that in the chat. Somebody said, what is warp speed?
Oh, you have to ask a scientist for that. You can't ask an HR person. I'd have no clue.
Somebody said, do the astronauts get weaker while in space?
Yes, that is actually a big concern. They tend to lose bone mass density. And so similar, right, to aging, we do a bunch of things to work with them because without the force of gravity, right, keeping their bones in tip-top shape is harder to do. So there are several resistive exercise devices on board the International Space Station, and they are, as part of their job, they are required to work out on these resistive exercise devices for roughly 2 hours a day. So imagine if you were forced to do 2 hours of exercise. It sounds horrible, but right, the view from space is great, so none of them complain. But yes, it certainly is something that we watch and we monitor, and then we do test them and treat them to make sure that they get any lost bone density back when they return to Earth.
Okay, great. And somebody asked, how often are astronauts able to go into space?
So astronauts, they would go into space anytime, right? If you asked most of them, they'd leave tomorrow if they could. Certainly during the shuttle program, where we were flying multiple missions with 6 to 8 crew members, space flight assignments were a little bit easier to come by. With the retirement of the shuttle program and now flying astronauts to the International Space Station, since the end of the shuttle program, we have only had the capability to get US astronauts to space via the Russian Soyuz vehicle. And so we are probably sending maybe 2 to 3, 2 to 4 maybe astronauts per year on various vehicles up and down. Again, now that we are back and have some successful commercial partners, specifically SpaceX, the goal is to be able to fly up and down more regularly. And hopefully that increases the number of astronauts that are able to go each year. Typically right now, a mission on board the International Space Station is roughly around 6 months. So the good news is once they get to go, they enjoy a long stay. We've actually had a couple of crew members who, for various scientific reasons, have stayed on board the space station for almost a year at a time.
Wow. So is height affected in space? Because I see somebody asked, how long does it take for your height to return when you get back to Earth? But I don't know if that's something that's affected. Is that?
Well, it is actually. Right, without gravity, there is less compression on the spine. And so you tend to get a little taller in space. So for those of you that, are height challenged, maybe going to space makes you a few inches taller. And we actually saw some interesting studies. Some of you may remember the first crew member to do a 1-year mission was actually Scott Kelly, and he is an identical twin. His brother, Mark Kelly, is currently a senator from the state of Arizona. And so we were actually able to do quite a few studies related to identical twins, with one on Earth and one living on board the space station. And he liked it for the period of time when he came home, and he was a few inches taller than his identical twin brother
Oh, wow.
after spending a year in space.
Super interesting. Somebody asked, did they allow pets to go on the space station?
Ooh, do rodents count?
Ooh, I don't know.
I don't know. They do some, right? So the goal of the space station is of course right, to advance scientific achievement and discovery. And so there are a bunch of experiments that go on board related to pharmaceuticals, related to cancer, things, right? You can study crystal and protein growth in a zero gravity environment, which has really helped advance a lot of discoveries and on Earth. They do studies on occasionally on rodents, mice, because they're small, lightweight, and easy to fly. But that, to my knowledge, is the only quote unquote thing you could consider a pet on board ISS.
Okay.
I'm sure everyone would love to take their dog, but thus far that's not been allowed.
Okay. Somebody said that a resident asked a question saying that you were talking about Russian language. Do they learn Chinese?
So they right now do not learn Chinese. The Russian language requirements really stem from the fact that we've had a really firm and solid partnership with the Russian Space Agency to build the International Space Station, and then obviously to keep it operational for the last 20 years. And so there is always at least one Russian cosmonaut and at least one US astronaut on board the space station. And so, and again, with the end of the retirement of the space shuttle program, we were flying exclusively on the Soyuz vehicle up and down. And so as a result of also flying and training in Russia a lot for that vehicle's use, right, there is a need for the US astronauts to speak Russian.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then Scott asked, what is the food like for the astronauts in space?
So, they are constantly trying to improve space food. Uh, we have an entire food research laboratory at the Johnson Space Center. They do, before an astronaut flies in space, they actually do several kind of taste tests with them, because one of the things we do know is that people's um, tastes kind of change in space. Again, your fluids are kind of working differently in a zero gravity environment, and so that does impact taste. But an astronaut gets to select a lot of their menu prior to launching. And there have been a lot of advancements in what we can kind of safely prepare and package for astronauts to reheat. We also have several supply ships that bring supplies up, right? They're cargo ships that aren't carrying humans but carry supplies. And so thankfully, at least periodically when those arrive, they also get a good selection of fresh fruits and vegetables as well, for the duration that lasts. But otherwise, they're eating freeze-dried food. But I think you'd be pleasantly surprised that it's actually quite yummy.
Oh, super interesting. Somebody asked, what is the difference between cosmonauts and astronauts?
It is simply, I think, terminology. The Russians refer to their folks there as cosmonauts, whereas we say astronauts.
Okay, gotcha. Let me see. I think somebody else asked a question. Is there a mission to Mars?
So that is, I think anyone that works at NASA would tell you that's certainly what we hope for. Right? We've been to the moon. I think we will go back to the moon. I think it'll be really exciting because we'll send a woman to the moon, given that we only sent men previously. But certainly everyone that works at NASA is hopeful and optimistic that we will send humans to Mars. Hopefully you have been able to follow in the news the recent Mars mission, right? Where the first, actually, there was a helicopter in the most recent Perseverance mission that's been able to do some aerial footage of Mars. And we currently do a lot of robotic missions to Mars. But again, I think the end goal is that we can send humans to explore, just as we sent humans to explore the moon.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions that they'd like to ask Anne at the moment? Perhaps your residents have any questions as well. Thank you, Anne, so much for taking the time to answer everybody's questions.
Oh, of course. And I wish you all well and stay healthy. And again, I apologize for my coughing. Just the luck of the draw that I've
Yes.
have a little bit of a cold, so I apologize for that. But thank you. It was an honor for me to be with you today.
Thank you. I see Absorka asked, do the mice float in the ships, or where they are? Do they float in space with them?
Well, technically they do. I don't think they're allowed to let them out of right. I don't think they let them out anywhere that they could end up someplace where they're not supposed to be, because they could easily disappear in nooks and crannies, and it's probably the last thing an astronaut wants to find is a dead mouse
Yes.
months later. So,
Very true.
but yes, yes, they would float too, even in their little houses.
Mhm. Great. Well, a lot of people are saying thank you so much. It was very interesting. They really appreciate your time, and it is a pleasure hearing everything that you had to share with us. I'm going to go ahead and send out this recording to everybody as well, just so that they can reference it. I see Absorka said one more question. Is the term beam me up used? I think that's the movie.
No, yeah, no, that's more of a Star Trek thing, although maybe we should. I wish we could beam people up. I might be willing to go if they could beam me up instead of having to ride on a rocket. But so who knows? Maybe that's yet to come.
Okay, well, great. I think that's everybody's question. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Everybody, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this call today. If you have any questions later on, feel free to send them our way. Okay.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.